Hello, I'm Nima Rajan. A new week of uncertainty is ahead as several major U.S. cities are cleaning up following anti-racism and anti-police brutality protests that have at times turned violent. The demonstrations are in reaction to last week's death of George Floyd, a black man killed in Minneapolis while in police custody. His brother, Terrence Floyd, says he doesn't like to see peaceful protests turning chaotic. Former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin was charged Friday with third-degree murder and second-degree manslaughter in Mr. Floyd's death. Canadians by the thousands turned out over the weekend for rallies, marches, and protests in solidarity with U.S. demonstrators over the killings of African Americans by police. Toronto held a peaceful march on Saturday, while Vancouver and Montreal held rallies yesterday. Vancouver's downtown event went off peacefully, but after thousands marched peacefully in Montreal, some smaller groups clashed with police later in the evening, where some fires were lit and stores vandalized. 11 people were arrested. American health experts are concerned that protests across the U.S. will derail efforts to track and contain the spread of COVID-19, just as those efforts were finally getting underway. Government officials are hoping to continue reopening the economy after months of stay-at-home orders. But health experts also hope the reopening would be accompanied by widespread testing, contact tracing, and isolation to prevent new waves of illness. Chinese state media has weighed in on the protests in the U.S., comparing them to last year's violent anti-government demonstrations in Hong Kong. The ruling Communist Party's newspaper, The Global Times, said Chinese experts had noted that U.S. politicians might think twice before commenting again on issues in Hong Kong, knowing that their words might backfire on them one day. The protests are an opportunity for China to allege double standards from foreign governments and the Western media over its handling of Hong Kong protests, its treatment of Muslim minorities in the northwest region of Xinjiang, and other human rights issues. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says the federal government is rushing $2.2 billion in expected infrastructure funding to Canadian cities. Speaking outside his Ottawa residence, Trudeau says the money can be used for construction projects to meet local infrastructure needs and put people to work. Municipalities have seen steep losses in revenues through the COVID-19 pandemic as fewer people pay for transit or parking, and recreation centers stay closed without programs to fill local coffers. The $2.2 billion is much less than municipalities say they need. Injured Canadian veterans are being forced to wait on average twice as long as promised to find out whether they qualify for financial help from the government. Veterans are told the vast majority will know within 16 weeks whether they qualify for compensation and assistance for service-related injuries. Yet the average wait time at the end of April was 34.5 weeks. Veterans Affairs did not say how much the COVID-19 pandemic is contributing to the problem. As COVID-19 cases continue to decline in much of the country, some provinces are loosening more of the restrictions they implemented. British Columbia is giving parents the option of sending their children back to school on a part-time basis. Manitoba is easing restrictions, including its ban on people visiting loved ones in personal care homes. In Ontario, drive-in movie theaters and battling cages were allowed to reopen yesterday, but restaurants and gyms are still closed to in-house visits. Community organizations, advocates, researchers, and health workers across Canada are working to fill gaps in information about COVID-19 for newcomers and immigrants to Canada. Kevin Huang is the project manager of C19 Response Coalition, which sprang up in Vancouver to help seniors from the Chinese, Filipino, and Vietnamese Canadian communities. He says languages other than English have largely been left out of public health communication during the pandemic. Members of Canada's cattle industry say they're waiting for the other shoe to drop when it comes to the long-term impact of COVID-19. Feedlot operator Tom Thorlaxon says he has stopped buying cattle as he still has some in the pens from the middle of April that were supposed to have been gone long ago. Cow-calf producers are worried that there will still be a backlog in meatpacking plants this fall, which could cause a glut of animals and lower prices. State and local U.S. leaders are pleading with Washington for more federal aid for the coronavirus. Many countries, or counties rather, are cutting their government workforce, and states are facing deficits. The Senate resumed session today with no immediate plans to consider a fresh round of relief. After the $3 trillion package, the Senate Republicans are now focused on trimming unemployment benefits and getting Americans back to work. Well, the first day of June sees coronavirus restrictions ease from Asia to Europe, even as U.S. protests against police brutality sparked fears about new outbreaks. Ferries restarted in Bangladesh, golfers hit the links in Greece, students returned in Britain, and Dutch bars and restaurants are open. In Italy, visitors are being welcomed back to landmarks like the Vatican museums and the Colosseum. In a survey of 155 countries last month, the World Health Organization found worrying problems in the provision of health care for people with non-communicable diseases, many of whom are at higher risk of severe complications from COVID-19. The survey noted a partial or complete disruption of services for people with high blood pressure and diabetes treatment during the ongoing coronavirus pandemic. The survey also found that 42% of countries had interrupted services for cancer patients and 31% for heart emergencies. In more than 90% of countries, healthcare staff had been partially or fully reassigned to pandemic duties. Well, through the COVID-19 pandemic, Canadians have been told to stay home. Now the federal government is helping them do the same thing when it comes to travel. Ottawa is earmarking millions of dollars to promote holiday travel inside Canada. The funds announced by Economic Development Minister Melanie Joly yesterday includes $30 million originally earmarked for attracting foreign visitors. The money will instead be used to help provinces and territories encourage Canadians to discover their own backyard. Well, that'll do it for today's news update. I'm Nima Rajan. Thank you for joining us today, and I'll see you next time.